あれ。約束1、部屋を明るくしてみよう。約束2、テレビから離れてみよう。約束3、繰り返し見たいときは一度目を休めてからにしよう。
They call us the eyes of the army, for we scout for the foe far and wide. And with all information worth having, we keep the powers fully supplied. There are corps who bear much longer records for brave deeds, yet history will find that in the great fight for the cause of the right, we airmen were not far behind. 1914 was a time when much of Europe was divided. Britain's empire consisted of a quarter of the world and had the most powerful navy. Germany, with its massive land army, was in the process of developing its own navy and making alliances with Austria and Italy. Peace in Europe was becoming a fragile affair. Aviation was in its infancy and consisted in military terms mainly of airships and balloons for observation and reconnaissance purposes. Aeroplanes, though, were starting to prove to be much more flexible than balloons, and the Royal Aircraft Factory were producing a number of aircraft designs, including the Reconnaissance Experimental and British Experimental, which were used by some of the existing 5 squadrons within the Royal Flying Corps. The expansion in aviation necessitated the need for more aerial resources, and with the War Office's intention of operating 7 military squadrons, the official notification for the formation of No. 6 Squadron was laid down in the military wing orders of the 30th of January 1914. Captain John Harold Whitworth Beck will carry out the formation of No. 6 Squadron commencing tomorrow, the 31st instant. No. 6 Squadron will be stationed at South Farnborough. The squadron started flying with 2 Royal Aircraft Factory BE-2s and 2 Morris Farman Longhorns. During the summer of 1914, the squadron practiced making the aeroplane a machine for war. With Germany invading Belgium on the 3rd of August, Britain declared war the following day, having promised to support Belgium. No. 6 Squadron was almost immediately stripped of its trained pilots and aircraft by No. 2 Squadron. Captain Beck was now Major Beck, and having handed all his resources over in France on the 9th of September, returned to England to rebuild his fighting squadron. Less than 1 month later, he had built up the squadron sufficiently to fly to Bruges. Arriving on the 7th of October, their first war missions were carried out the next day when 2 reconnaissance sorties were made. This was 1914, and powered flight was barely 11 years old. The Great War had begun. And while the fighting was at first fluid, advances and counterattacks stagnated, leading to the beginning of trench warfare. Soon, it would be claiming lives daily, with the conditions in which men were living and fighting becoming truly horrific. What awaited the young soldiers were months of appalling conditions. Intelligence at the time was difficult, and exact locations of the enemy and their supply routes could only be surmised. What made a difference was the advent of aerial reconnaissance. The First Battle of Ypres began on the 19th of October 1914. This saw the 1st Squadron aerial victory by Captain Marsh, who forced down a Fokker near Saint-Omer. In November 1914, Lieutenants Adamson and Kinnear, whilst observing for the 87th Battery Royal Field Artillery, dropped a note. "You hit them. We must go home. No petrol." The squadron's gunner's stripe originated from this event, markings that are still carried on the aircraft at this day. Aerial tactical reconnaissance was now an important weapon against the enemy. During the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle in March 1915, the whole trench system of the enemy at the main point of attack had been carefully photographed and made available to attacking troops for the first time. Another development was the introduction of the single-seat aircraft onto the squadron for the harassment of German reconnaissance aircraft. The first 2 allotted to the squadron were a Martinsyde and Bristol Scout. The pilots of these aircraft soon began to fit improvised gun mounts, and the British single-seat fighter was born. The first Victoria Cross, awarded for aerial combat, went to 6th Squadron pilot, Captain Lano Hawker, flying a Bristol Scout. On the 25th of July 1915, when on a lone patrol, he attacked 3 German aircraft in succession. The 3rd attack required him to climb to over 10,000 feet, and closing to within 100 yards, he opened fire with his Lewis gun. The German Albatross was destroyed in the air and became the first enemy aircraft to be shot down in flames by a pilot from the Royal Flying Corps. While on No. 6 Squadron, Captain Hawker became the first British ace with 7 kills before being promoted to command the 1st British Fighter Squadron, No. 24. He lost his life to Baron Manfred von Richthofen in a battle that lasted over 30 minutes. Richthofen fired over 900 bullets at Hawker as he tried to return to Allied lines, but a single round hit Hawker, unfortunately fatally. Destroying enemy aircraft in these early days of flight required much ingenuity. Captain Lewis Strange flew the Martinsyde, and on more than one occasion dangled weights off cables from his undercarriage to try and break the enemy's propellers. However, Strange's most famous exploit on No. 6 Squadron was hanging on to a jammed machine gun magazine that saved him from certain death when he fell out of his spinning fighter. The following 2 years saw the squadron operate as a pure reconnaissance unit, flying a progression of BE-2 variants and the Royal Aircraft Factory Reconnaissance 8. The squadron pilots continued their excellent work for the Army in the face of heavy opposition and losses from the roaming German fighter units. 1918 was a time of change. The 1st of April saw the formation of the Royal Air Force, but with the armistice came the need for fewer aircrew and squadrons. No. 6, though, were one of the lucky few not to get disbanded. The squadron, however, was destined for further expeditions, and on the 14th of July 1919, 6 sailed for Iraq, and as a squadron would not return to home soil until 1969. During this time in the Middle East, the squadron's main task was one of air policing and communications under the British Mandate of Iraq, and saw the squadron re-equipped with the Bristol fighter in 1920. On the 1st of April 1931, the squadron was redesignated as No. 6 Bomber Squadron, and subsequently re-equipped with Fairey Gordons. This was a golden time for the squadron, with air displays and long-range flights spicing up the day-to-day training. It was here the first hint of trouble between the Arabs and the Jews in Palestine was recorded in the squadron record book on the 6th of August 1931. The detached flight at Ramleh, Palestine, was standing by on account of an Arab-Jewish strike. The squadron in full were deployed to Palestine for policing operations against the insurgents. September 1935 saw Hawker Harts and Demons replace the aging Gordons. These 6 Squadron Hawker Harts are seen here patrolling over Palestine. By 1936, the situation in Palestine had deteriorated. An entry in the squadron logbook reads, "Cases of murder, sabotage, arson, and destruction of crops were reported over a wide area. Orders were issued to the effect that machine gun fire from the air may be used without previous authority." On the 3rd of September 1936, the squadron lost its first aircraft and crew to accurate rifle fire, and were constantly battling with insurgent Arabs for the next 3 years. Hardy and Gauntlet aircraft were introduced to aid the squadron in its efforts. No. 6 Squadron is extremely proud of this part of its history, for it is doubtful whether any other unit of the 3 services has ever won as many awards for bravery during the years of peacetime. On the 3rd of September 1939, the Prime Minister declared that a state of war existed between Great Britain and Germany. World War II had begun. As the Stukas and Panzers poured into France and Italy entered the war, No. 6 remained in Palestine. Re-equipped with the Western Lysander, the squadron prepared for the inevitable move to the western desert of Egypt to face the Axis forces in Libya and Tunisia. On the 19th of September 1940, a detachment of Sea Flight set out for Kasaba in the desert west of Alexandria. The Lysanders provided excellent information on the Italians as the British advanced across Libya towards Mersa Matruh. At the beginning of 1941, one of the squadron's flights was equipped with the Hurricane Mark I. However, the German presence in North Africa had now turned the tide of battle. The British were forced back towards Egypt, with the port of Tobruk being laid under siege. With German supply lines stretching back to Tripoli, Tobruk assumed considerable importance to Rommel. No. 6 Squadron was sent to Tobruk to aid in its defense. With Axis columns halted by exhausted petrol supplies, Tobruk had to be taken by Rommel to ease the strain on the German supply lines. Despite constant shelling by German guns and repeated dive bombing, the squadron managed to keep its aircraft in the air. May the 6th Squadron diary reads, "We were attacked by 22 dive bombers with such fierceness and accuracy that we were on the road to believing that the German airmen have a personal grudge against us. Our serviceability has dwindled to such an extent that at the moment we have only one machine that is flyable, and that won't change pitch, and therefore only takes to the air for 10 minutes." With repeated attacks by Me-109s on the Lysanders and Hurricanes, tactical reconnaissance and artillery cooperation were a difficult and dangerous job at the best of times. Many of the squadron's aircraft were attacked whilst landing, riddling the aircraft with holes and wounding the crew. The squadron never gave up its attempts to aid the ground forces, and the request was never refused if there was a serviceable aircraft available. Often Lysanders were flown without tail wheels, and Hurricanes without working hydraulics. Due to the overwhelming opposition and depletion of serviceable aircraft, operating from Tobruk was untenable, and on the 10th of May 1941, it became necessary to withdraw. The squadron motto, Oculi Exercitus, the eyes of the army, had been proudly fulfilled in these darkest days of war. But in 1942, something happened that turned number 6 into the hunters rather than the hunted.
It's an early morning in the Western Desert. Any morning, in fact, in the last months of 1942. Vic Squadron was a small unit in the great force which pursued Rommel across the wastes of Libya and is camped somewhere between El Alamein and Tripoli before the collapse of the Axis forces in Africa. As the blazing desert day begins, ground crews strip off the camouflage covers which hide the tank-busting Hurricanes. The squadron has been moving forward for weeks now, a day or two here, and then on to a new place just like this, but nearer to Tripoli. The ground crews are always busy when the aircraft are not flying. They can only relax when the kites are away, and that can be a pretty anxious time too. This morning, as usual, there is plenty of work to do on the Hurricanes. There's wonderful all-purpose machines. The Hurricane started life as a fighter, and with the Spitfires, damaged the enemy mightily in the Battle of Britain. There are many modified fighter versions. Then came the Harrier bombers, and now a new and formidable type, the Hurricane 2D, the tank buster. It is armored with two 40mm cannons slung under the main planes. These, the largest bore weapons yet fitted on any flying aircraft, weigh only 320 pounds. They fire 2.5-pound shells, and the aircraft also carries two .303 machine guns, a devastating total of firepower. The Hurricane 2D is part of our answer to the German tank warfare technique, and a pretty sound answer too. We've got plenty more tricks like this in store, just waiting till they're wanted. Quite a lot of any man's time in war is spent waiting. Waiting until he's wanted. Waiting to go into action. The pilots rush out to the machines. Engines burst into life. Chocks away. The can openers have a job to do, which won't wait. They taxi out. Across the sand into the sky. Most of the tank busters' pilots are old desert campaigners, for their aircraft were first in action in June 1942 after months of experimental work. In the first year of the Alamein offensive, they accounted for 19 enemy tanks, and during all the long triumphant pursuit, they have been doing brilliant work. Their job calls for skill and courage of a high order. Low over the desert they fly, low over the mechanized columns of our advancing army. Soon they have to climb to a great height, cross the dead ground between us and the enemy. Target below. Hurricanes peel off and swoop down to the attack. The German tank is blazing now, finished, knocked clean out of the war by the tremendous power of fire from the tank busters' cannons. The job has been well done. And so the flight reforms and heads for home, to the little camp, which, wherever it may be, is the center of the squadron's life.
With the victorious Germans advancing to Alam Halfa, General Montgomery, a recent arrival from England, was arranging his forces to counter Rommel's strategy. The The Battle of Alam Halfa stopped Rommel in his tracks. He had met his match. At Bir Hakem, the Free French Brigade were heavily pressed by German armor. 6th Squadron carried out low-level attacks and destroyed the armor. Bravo the RAF was the message from the Free French forces. This battle marked the first of many defeats which would culminate in the eventual destruction of the Afrika Korps. The air offensive at El Alamein had started a few days previous to the main attack, with German airfields being the main targets. At 10:30 a.m. on the 23rd of October 1942, the first sortie was flown by 6th Squadron when it set out to intercept 6 enemy tanks, all of which were destroyed. Later that evening, the great artillery barrage opened and the British attack began at El Alamein.
Fire! Fire!
The powerful drive by the British and Allied forces sent the Germans and their Italian allies stumbling back into Libya, and large columns of prisoners were seen by the squadron. The number of derelict and abandoned vehicles scattered over the desert grew daily as the offensive continued. A large number of these were due to the S guns of No. 6 Squadron. After a break from offensive duties, No. 6 Squadron returned to tank-busting operations in 1943, stationed at Castel Benito, Libya. On the 22nd of March, the squadron launched an attack upon German armor amassing behind the Mareth line at El Hamma. 32 tanks were destroyed within the space of 3 hours, with the loss of 4 aircraft. By May, the enemy had been driven out of North Africa, with much credit going to the airborne tank busters. The legend of the flying tin openers was born. July 1943 saw the squadron being equipped with Hurricane 4 aircraft firing rocket projectiles. Transferred to Italy in February 1944 for operations along the Adriatic, the squadron was assigned to anti-shipping patrols and to carry out land strikes against forts, convoys and coastal gun positions.
We went off one day on what we used to call an armed reconnaissance. 4 aircraft took off from the island of Vis and just swept the sea looking for any shipping that happened to be straying out. So we could just do an attack, like a target of opportunity, if you like. We didn't have a specific target, but when we left, we were briefed that in the island of Rab, which is about 200 miles north, there were 2 German Seabull ferries. This is information that had come from the partisans. Well, we didn't see anything in the open sea, and so we said, let's go and have a look at Rab. So we went into a bit of a dive and came down. There was some flak coming up from a little island near Rab. And there they were in a little harbour. So I attacked the one on the right, and then I looked round and I could see another Hurricane silhouetted against a huge ball of flame, which was bigger than the side of a house, and he'd hit the other one. It transpired that one was laden with fuel, the one that I hit, and the other one was laden with ammunition. And, it caused a lot of chaos. But the amusing part there was, as I came in to attack, I could see a man running away, and his feet appeared not to be touching the ground. And I remember sort of smiling to myself and hoping that he would get out of the way in time. I didn't want to kill him.
I had one occasion down towards the Albanian border. It concerned looking for gun positions. As I was circling, looking down for this possible gun position, it found me first. A few shots hit the aircraft, came through the wingtips, a bit of a bang in the canopy, and I had my goggles up on my head, top of my head. And later it appeared that it bounced off my goggles that were on my head, and that was the bang that I heard.
I think we lost 11 pilots in about a year, which is quite heavy casualties on a single-seater squadron.
The end of the war came, but there was no rest for the squadron. Back in Palestine, 6 resumed its duties against the Jewish rebels and terrorists, patrolling the oil pipelines to the coast. The squadron were now to operate Tempest 6 aircraft, and whilst awaiting their arrival, were given a few Spitfire Mark 9s to support the dwindling Hurricane strength.
I knew with the Hurricane you couldn't fly a Hurricane inverted because of the carburetor. It was a float-type carburetor. But heard that the Spitfire, the later models, did have a different type of system where you could invert the aircraft, and was probably the second flight in one. I'd gained quite a bit of height and thought, I'll just see if this works, you know. And turned it over, and of course, well, not of course, but in fact, the engine just spluttered and stopped, and this was in Palestine, and so I got it righted, and with those machines, you need a half a dozen hands, and because you've got to pump and push switches and control the stick at the same time to get the engine started again. But it did start, so I was quite happy about that.
The Tempest 6 arrived in December 1946, and the squadron saw troubled times again in Palestine. One pilot was approached to sell his aircraft, the going rate being £7,000. The suggested method was to land in Palestine, be taken and dumped in the sea, rescued, and after a brief stay in hospital, released. On the 17th of October 1949, the first Vampire jet fighters arrived, and conversion courses for pilots were started. During January 1950, the squadron moved again, this time to Habanya, for a short liaison visit with the Iraqi Air Force. The Vampires were regular visitors to many Middle Eastern countries at this time.
We were arriving on the dispersals at 2 o'clock in the morning and getting there flying in as early as we could, because the temperatures were such that being metal aircraft, metal skin, you couldn't touch the aircraft. We had yellow mats thrown over the wings so that anyone that wanted to get into the cockpit didn't get burnt.
One of the things was that the Iraqi Air Force were re-equipping. They were going from, Furies, was it?
Well, they were called Baghdad Furies from their point of view, but they were a sea view without the arrestor hooks and what have you. And of course they had tropical radiators on them.
They were converting, I believe, to Venoms, which were upmarket to ours, though they were seen at that time as an ally, but a very iffy ally.
A Fury was coming back in, and as he came into circuit, he called out that he hadn't a undercarriage light. So he overflew the tower, and they confirmed that he got one undercarriage leg up. So it was strange, because he was saying, "Can someone come and get me down?" But on the face of it, he was quite correct in what he was saying, because we sent a Vampire out who stationed himself on his wing and took him down. And he instructed the Iraqi pilot to shut his engine down as the Vampire's wheels touched the runway. And he made a perfect belly landing along the sand at the side of the runway. Came to a stop, completely unharmed, whereupon an Iraqi chap ran up, a Iraqi Air Force chap ran up with a fire axe and chopped straight through the hood and injured him on the head.
During February 1954, the squadron was once again re-equipped, this time with Venoms, which were faster and better armed than the Vampire. At their practice camp in Nicosia, the squadron's scores on the ranges were, as usual, well above average.
They were first-class fighters, particularly in the ground attack operations. They were not sufficiently fast or powerful enough as air defence aircraft, but in terms of the ground attack, dive bombing, rocketing, air to ground, they were first class, very stable aeroplanes.
On the 6th of April 1956, the squadron moved to Akrotiri on Cyprus. During the first week of November in that year, the squadron was involved in the Suez Crisis as an element of Operation Musketeer. Whilst engaged in attacking airfields and military camps along the Suez Canal, no aircraft were lost. June 1957 saw the end of single-seat fighting for the squadron and a move to Canberra bombers. The Vampires and Venoms would not be seen flying their famous six formation again.
If you envisage the top neck of the six, that curving part, and then the circular part at the bottom, where the neck joins with the circular part, I was leading one of the sections of four, and we were running into Habanya, rehearsing for the Queen's coronation ceremony in 1952, and I had an engine failure running into Habanya, and of course it was fortunate that right in front of me was the airfield, but as I looked around, having set up my glide into the airfield, looked around, there was the boss with his nicely shaped neck of a six flying all along, and the circular part of the bottom part of the circle all over the sky, you know, some going in one direction, some going in another, as I had dropped back on the engine failure.
In July of 1957, the first Canberras arrived.
We had mixed loads of weapons in those days. We could fill the bomb bay with 6,000 pounders of high explosive. We could put AS-30 missiles inboard of the engines, 1,000-pound high explosive bombs outboard of the engines, various other naughty weapons on the wings, and it was pretty pokey. And because it was very manoeuvrable aircraft, it could fly up to reasonable altitudes over 40,000 feet, or it was equally as well at 40 foot off of the ground. It had that range. So we used to fly high-low, high missions. We'd get airborne, climb to a great height. When we were nearing the targets, or the targets against which we were practicing, we would then drop down to low level, 40 feet, 50 feet off the deck, or as low as operational circumstances permitted, and we would fly at low level and deliver our weapons, sometimes high explosive, sometimes simulated nuclear weapons, at low level, look at the targets, assume that we had hit them, because we're always going to hit them, and then climb back up to high level and try and find somewhere safe, because at the end of that the world would have been a smoking red ruin, and try and find somewhere to land back at. The Middle East Air Force was our home posting, and we would go to Sharjah, Mazira, both airfields on the Arabian Gulf. We used to fly Lone Rangers up to Tehran, in which a crew would just get into an airplane and go to Tehran for a liaison visit, or a dirty weekend, whichever way you want to look at it. Or we'd fly down to Rhodesia for a weekend, officially always for training purposes, but there was always a lot of enjoyment in it. We were the main suppliers of pork sausages, bacon to the British Embassy in Tehran, for which they were always grateful, and they always threw good parties for us.
With the end of the Cyprus-Canberra strike force, No. 6 Squadron returned home for the first time in over 54 years, becoming the first RAF F4 Phantom unit, based at RAF Coningsby in Lincolnshire. The function was to train in the ground attack and reconnaissance roles, in case the Cold War of the time ever became hot. During February 1974, King Hussein of Jordan honoured the squadron at Coningsby on the 60th anniversary of No. 6, continuing the tradition of the close links held between the Hashemite kingdom and the squadron. On the 1st of October 1974, 6th Squadron officially changed from a Phantom to a Jaguar Squadron, and dawn broke on another aircraft type, one which would see over 30 years of service with the squadron. RAF Coltishall is today the home for 6th Squadron, with 54, 41 and 16, the operational conversion unit, also sharing the base. Coltishall is a hive of activity, with up to 50 Jaguar movements a day. All the squadrons on the base have high demands for aircraft, so it's not unusual to see 6th Squadron pilots flying other squadron aircraft. Also, other squadrons' pilots will join 6 for various sorties. It's a very amicable arrangement and appears to work well.
Okay, there was a three-way jet swap going on. Yeah. So you're going to use 54s, which was Golf Tango, that's completely biffed. Yeah. I mean, but Pops Tango belongs to 6th Squadron. And 6th Squadron had loaned us that to fly this morning. As far as I'm concerned, Pops Tango is now yours. It's on our line. We're happy to engineer it, and you can land it back on your line because it's your jet.
6th Squadron, though, is not just the pilots flying the aircraft. There's a support team of personnel who are vital to its very existence.
It's very much a team effort of 140 people. I mean, there is no way that the squadron wouldn't function properly without my ground crew, who form the majority of the personnel on the squadron. I have only 15 pilots, 2 engineering officers, an intelligence officer and an army officer. And the rest are my dedicated engineering staff and support personnel. We have very limited resources at the moment. You're always struggling to get 7 or 8 aircraft maybe per day on the line, and everybody's working hard to get the most out of flying those aircraft. So from the pilots to the ops staff to the engineers, everybody's working as a team to try and get the most out of every flying day.
The Jaguar is now nearing the end of its operational life, but still plays an effective role within the RAF.
The traditional role of the Jaguar is very much a ground attack aeroplane. It's also being used very widely for reconnaissance. Our role has very much developed as we've taken on munitions like the Paveway 2 laser-guided bomb, and now we can also drop the Paveway 3 laser-guided bomb. We have CRV-7 rockets, which are extremely fast rocket and very accurate.
Roger, can see white objects in that position.
Confirmed gun barrel is north, call 10 seconds for laser.
Laser on.
Laser is on.
In hot.
Snow, you are clear hot.
Its strong points are very much its stability as a weapons platform, whether at medium level or particularly at low level. Because of its small wing, it rides the bumps extremely well. So in terms of being able to accurately deliver munitions onto a target from a stable platform, then the Jaguar is a very good aircraft for that.
We're operating at the max that the Jag can do pretty much all the time, just because of its age. Nowadays it's fairly underpowered in comparison with modern aircraft. So we always do max power takeoffs and climbs, and pretty much we'll run around at low level at 450 knots. We can quite easily get up to in excess of 500 up to the release of service of just under 600 knots, and that just depends what fits you actually have on the aircraft. At medium level we'll normally fly around using Mach number of 0.7 to 0.8, and obviously we can go up to 0.95. If you've got the fuel to use, you can get there. So the jet has no problems getting to any of the regimes. What you're just looking at putting out the other end is the fuel, and have you got the fuel to actually do it. If you think you've got time to relax, you're probably doing something wrong. You ought to be thinking ahead on what you should be doing next.
It's very quick at low level, and it's even with the warload on. However, it does tend to lose a lot of speed when it turns. So it's made for straight lines and low and fast. It was initially designed as a trainer, but its handling characteristics were not ideal, so it was turned into a fighter, and it has been known to depart and end up travelling backwards at quite a rate of knots.
It's a fast jet strike attack aircraft, so it's designed to do that mission, and it does that mission pretty well. When you ask it to turn, you know, and especially if you put heavy bombs on board, it's not going to turn that well. It'll lose plenty of speed. But if you fly her right and you treat her right, she'll get the job done. She'll get it done pretty well. The types of flying that they do is, you know, just great. I mean, you could get to go in that low. I mean, 500 feet is the lowest I'd ever flown in my Air Force career before coming here, and I'm flying 250 feet now, and eventually within a few months I'll be down at 100 feet. You know, going 450, 500 miles an hour, which is pretty great for sure. But I do miss my radar. There's definitely been times where the hair stood up on the back of my neck, you know, doing things for the first time with these guys. And you learn to know your own capabilities. And when when that hair starts to raise up on the back of your neck, you just take a step back, you climb it up a little bit, you let your flight lead know about it, or if you're leading, you just take that extra minute to get things sorted, and then you press on. And I wouldn't say afraid. I mean, I can't say that. I'm an Air Force pilot, single seat. But there's definitely times when you realize that you're kind of at the end of your tether, and you gotta climb back in, and that's when the airmanship has to take over. Something I'd like to say about the F-16 is, I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, but you feel like you could sit a monkey down in that thing and teach him to fly it eventually. Whereas in the Jag, you really have to know what you're doing. The workload on the pilot, being single-seat aircraft at certain points, is very high, and I'd say it's a good discriminator of pilot capability. If you're in the Jag and you're not good at what you do, it'll be painfully obvious. Whereas other aircraft, through better systems, fly-by-wire flight controls, other little knickknacks in the cockpit to help reduce your workload, you might be able to snake by as a mediocre pilot and people wouldn't know it as well. But the Jag makes you work hard. But like I said, once you've got it sorted out and you fly it well, it rewards you by putting the bomb on the target on time when it's supposed to.
In recent years, 6 Squadron has been involved in the First Gulf War, Bosnia, and the task of patrolling the Middle East no-fly zones.
We were flying from Italy, from an airbase called Gioia del Colle, in support of the Bosnian campaign, which was, you know, many, many weeks away. I got off relatively lightly in my time, in that I arrived just as the Jaguar was in fact being replaced by the Harrier, so I did one deployment. So I didn't spend too much time out of there, but that was flying over Bosnia-Herzegovina, doing some very interesting work with embedded, i.e. in-country forward air controllers, peacekeeping, patrolling the air, providing support. We were armed, carrying 1,000-pound bombs in support of ground operations in Bosnia.
It's the role of one of the squadrons who's on operational deployments in theatres like Bosnia to do reconnaissance and take pictures. My own personal experience of that was flying with the old-fashioned Viking pod, and also I flew with the Laurelgrove pod, which is an oblique-looking pod with a magnified lens, which used to give very good close-up images of the targets we were looking at. And the targets would range from small artillery pieces to sort of complete mapping type runs of somewhere like Mostar Airport.
We were called upon to deploy 2 aircraft to Gioia to become involved in what became known as Operation Deliberate Force, which subsequently led on to the Dayton Peace Accord. And 2 of us deployed from here to Gioia for a period of a month and flew operations in support of the Harriers of 4 Squadron.
But when the Jaguar first entered service, it wasn't all plain sailing.
There were inevitable teething problems with some of the equipment and some of the supply of equipment. It was very much billed as a new generation of avionics that would, in certain group captains' immortal phrase, put a bomb in a bucket. The development of the avionics took a little while after the aircraft first came into our hands. So it was really probably a couple of years before the full avionic fit, including the laser rangefinder, was made available. We were flying around with ballast in the nose to start with, instead of the laser rangefinder. And that was a big improvement when that came along, of course.
Like most RAF aircraft, Updating systems and avionics is essential if they are to remain effective in their combat roles. This is obvious to no one more than squadron leader Mark Cutmore, who returned to the Jaguar having had a tour with the Red Arrows.
It has changed hugely. The aeroplane has changed beyond recognition internally. It has the best navigation solution I think we've got in the Air Force, and a lot of other countries would be dead chuffed to have that as well. There's everything possible to help the pilot achieve his mission. I think what has changed that you don't see though is the ability of the people that are flying the things now. Everybody, I think, is so much more threat aware. I think years of ops in Turkey and so on have honed the force, and it's not just a case of relearning what I once used to know, it's actually learning a whole load of new things. I think it's a very, very professional outfit.
From a tactical perspective, these days what I like about it most is the avionics suite, which has changed quite considerably over the time that I've been away from the airplane, so about 6 years. And now that I've come back, you've got a very good liquid crystal central display on which you can have map displays, your emergency FRC, your checks. You can have the tiled view, and it's all very clearly set out. As well as that, you've now got a very wide head-up display, which gives you excellent information, and you can select different things to be on or off the head-up display as you prefer your display.
The Rolls-Royce 104 Adur engine has served the Jaguar well, but with a requirement for the Jaguar to remain operational until as late as 2009, a replacement was needed. The successor was the 106, and although similar, modifications were required to the aircraft.
It's basically hotter and there's a bigger mass flow coming out through the back, so it's you've got a lot more vibration, a lot more heat in this area, so it's strengthened up the underneath the fuselage, the hook, the shield around the rear of the engine, and also the tailplane as well. There's a vibration airflow over the tailplane or under the tailplane. The main difference is the internal parts. They're actually made out of new materials technology, so they can take hotter temperatures and a greater flow through the engine. It produces a little bit more thrust at normal temperatures. At higher temperatures, desert conditions, it produces significantly more thrust, and we do notice that in the air. There's definitely a bit more poke in the aircraft at low level, and you can get the thing up a lot higher as well. So when you're coming back home from a long way off, you can climb up to a higher altitude and bring the jet back higher, and then therefore save gas.
Today, the Jaguar can carry an immense array of bombs, missiles and guns.
At Coltishall, day to day, we have practice weapons, which is a 14-kilogram practice bomb and a 3-kilogram practice bomb that replicate the 1,000-pound bombs, which we can't drop all the time. Operational activity, you have the Paveway 2 and the Paveway 3 laser-guided weapons, which can be designated by a laser pod fitted to another aircraft, or by a source on the ground forward air controller, and they can home in on the target on the laser. You have rockets that you can use, the guns, 230mm Aiden guns, the Sidewinder missile, which is stationed on top of the wing. You have the ECM and FEMAT, which is its countermeasure kit, flares, rearward firing flares. We can only mount weapons where the stations are. In the Gulf War, it proved to be there wasn't really enough stations on the Jaguar, hence they brought out the overwing pylons, which you'll see fit above the wings, and the missiles fit on top of the launchers on top of the wings, which is an unusual fit.
Lasers have also become a useful tool in guiding weapons and required a new skill to be learned by the technicians.
I've got 23 men working for me, and we're involved in the navigation, weapon aiming, communications, and things like GPS, train navigation, that type of thing. And weapon aiming, we do all the harmonisations on the kit, which basically makes the bomb hit. The armours, they'll fit the pod. TILE pod stands for thermal imaging and laser designated. The pod is fitted to the aircraft, usually on the centre line by the armours, and then we harmo the pod, usually at 2 known lat-long locations. From that point, once the pilot gets in, that aircraft will designate to where he puts it. He puts a crosshair over, as you see on TV, over the window, over the chimney, wherever he wants to hit, then it works like that. It works with the GPS, TRNS, it works with the navigation system from the aircraft. You can see on his display, his green-grey display, where the crosshair is. Even when he flies over, it sticks to it. And also, the aircraft can self-designate. You can fit the TILE pod to the starboard inner wing, inner pylon on the wing, and the bomb to the centre line, and it self-designates.
flash. Radar now, it's late at 7. Laser. Decommitted.
The Jaguar also carries what is known as a raids pod, big brother of the air.
What we're looking at here is the RAID system, which stands for Rangeless Airborne Integrated Debriefing System. And what it does is allows us to see, after we've flown, the exact parameters that the aircraft had at various phases in flight, in fact the entire flight, and gives us exact parameters like ranges, aspects, headings of all aircraft involved. They all see each other at all times. There isn't a particular area, and so you can bring up the entire UK, and the RAIDS pods all are getting the information from the aircraft, and they all talk to each other, and it all gets recorded on a small little card that you can then download and watch in here as you play it. What we're looking at here is, for example, a push north between Turbo 1 and Boxer 1 are in the same formation, okay? And most likely what you see here is a situation where this is a two-ship and Boxer is a two-ship, but the other aircraft involved did not actually have a RAIDS pod on it. We've done a lot better now. All of our jets now have pods so that for every sortie you can get the information on the jets. We've got an F3 here that's acting as escort for these two guys, okay, who are going in to hit a target against a DCA cap F3 in the north that's our simulated red air today. So that's why I've colored them as such. Yellow is the escort for us, and then the red is the bad guy here. And what I've done is I've paired up aircraft 1 and 9. So we have this kind of information, and as we play through, the jets have just rolled inverted and taken a big descent, and you can see that real time out of the aircraft as it does it there for the replay. And he's diving through 9,000 feet. What eventually is going to be able to happen with the integration is it's not just going to be a simple data download where you're replaying it after the fact. It will be a real-time thing that's airborne. The RAIDS pods will actually be able to detect when the switches are made in the right position in the aircraft. A trigger squeeze would happen. It would register a shot, and then that shot could actually be registered by another RAIDS pod in a jet. The parameters of that shot can be assessed by the pods while airborne, and the pods themselves will give an audio indication to the pilot to let you know that you've been shot.
Even with the technology to help, being a 6 Squadron pilot is still a busy job.
Thanks for that. Yeah, there is. There's always somebody that's on a workup. You need to do the more archetypal sorties that we're all used to, but more and more I've noticed that coming back, people are putting lots and lots of different things into sorties. It won't just be a low-level attack profile around Cumbria. It'll be, part of it might be that, then there'll be a medium-level attack, there'll be refueling, there'll be a medium-level bomb, there'll be some TIAL, helmet-mounted sight. Trying to cram every last bit of value into the limited hours we're getting these days. It's easy to look at a flight and think, you know, that's an hour and a half, that's fine, so what do you do with the rest of your day? But generally it turns into a 2.5 to 3 hour plan these days. You then brief, fly, come back, debrief. We've got the new RAIDS pod, which we can get a bird's eye view, a god's eye view almost of what's gone on the fight with all the players involved, which can, you know, fantastic value, but it just ekes out the whole process. So 1.5 hour sortie can sometimes take upwards of 6 hours to complete. So if you start at 8:30, you're already at the back end of the afternoon by the time you get spat out the far end. So they're busy times, but we get an awful lot out of these sorties now.
The day begins the day before with a programmer who will sit down. The programmer will have the assets that are available to him for the next day, predicted assets. Do we have a tanker to go and do some air-to-air refueling? Do we have range slots to go and do some practice weaponeering? What aeroplanes are we expecting? And from that, he'll sit down in a quiet, dark room and work together a program for the next day. He'll take training inputs to that, so he'll take who are the guys that are working through perhaps a pairs workup, a 4-ship workup where they're learning to lead a pair of aeroplanes, a 4-ship of aeroplanes. The new guys on the squadron who are on convex, conversion to the squadron, to the aircraft in the operational role, already learned to fly the airplane, they're now learning to fight very much with the airplane. So he'll have all the requirements for the next few days, in particular the next day. He'll put them together on a board and he'll jiggle them around and he'll come up with a program, which is a plan for the next day. That then goes up on the ops board, so everyone knows what they're doing. It's also published so people know what's going on in the next couple of days, not just on the squadron but also around the station, so air traffic, operations, all the engineers are aware of what's going on. And then the next day, a duty authorizer, duty auth, will come in, who's a squadron pilot, fairly senior squadron pilot, fairly experienced. And it's his job to manage that program on the day. Invariably, aeroplanes will go unserviceable in the morning, someone will call in sick, someone will have to run off and do something else, there will be a change, the weather won't be good. So it's his duty that day to get the best out of all the assets and everything that's available to him.
Planning for a sortie starts with the Joint Mission Planner. This enables the pilot to download the planned mission onto a cartridge, known as a brick, which is then loaded into the aircraft. The head-down display gives a constant track of where the aircraft is currently and where it should be, illustrated by an egg. If the aircraft loses track, it is just a matter of recapturing the egg within the yellow box to return to plan. Once the sortie is planned, there is a briefing held by the flight leader, who will go through every aspect of the mission.
Right, it's going to be an engaged fighter, a supporting fighter, and a defensive fighter. You're obviously the defensive fighter. One of us two will end up being engaged or supporting. We'll make that contract very, very shortly after the merge. If I've not done it and you call engaged, you know, so be it. But one of us will make the call.
After the brief, it's over to the kit room. When flying over water, immersion suits are required. These are fairly cumbersome and hot, but would be life-saving in a ditching situation. The flight then has to be cleared by the duty officer.
Nick, you're in Fox Hotel, IDL 106. Derbs, you're in Golf Fox, IDL 104. Planker, you're in Echo Golf, IDL 104 Gutless. And that covers our alternate GH. All please take the time to look behind you and have a look at what monthly stats you need.
Finally, the aircraft have to be signed out from the engineers.
Yeah. Being restarted, yeah.
Once at the aircraft, all the pre-flight checks are carried out by the pilot, who is already now 3 hours into his mission.
Coastal Ground, Colt 15, request taxi in November.
Colt 15, Coastal Ground, taxi runway 04.
Taxi 04, Colt 15.
Approach. Tower Colt 15 taxis.
So Colt 15 is on request.
Roger, Tower. Tower.
Approach Norwich North side active.
Roger.
And Colt 15 call lined up.
Lined up.
Squawk 6111.
6111.
London frequency 27777.
27777.
A-firm.
Roger.
Approach.
Tower. Back at ground send.
Blackhouse requesting separate squawks for 1 and 2 and door joined up on top.
Okay, roger, stand by.
Longer missions tend to require refueling, and meeting up with VC-10s is a regular occurrence for the pilots. Sharing with tornadoes is not unusual either.
Green on fuel close. Fox 1 steady. Fox 2, clear contact right. Red out right. Fuel flow dropping off on both blacksmiths. Cool. Fox 3 steady. Fox 4 stop. Fox 4, clear contact right.
Returning to Coltishall in low cloud requires a torque down from radar approach.
Turbo 2, torque down on handover, 10226.
Turbo 2, Coltishall torque down identified, QFE read back correct. Report final approach fixed gear down.
Full crew Turbo 2.
Slightly right of centre line, correcting nicely. 7 miles. Approaching descent point. Turn right 2 degrees, heading 040. And begin descent now for a 3-degree glide path, 6.5 miles. On glide path, on centre line. And turn right 2 degrees, heading 044. Slightly left of centre line, correcting slowly. 4 miles, Turbo 2 to land. Turbo 2, clear to land, 1 on, circuit clear, acknowledge.
Turbo 2.
In turn left 2 degrees, heading 042. On centre line, 3.5 miles, on glide path, surface wind, calm. On centre line, 1 mile. On glide path. Passing decision height.
Almost 5 hours since planning started, the pilots are still not finished. There's the aircraft to be booked back in, reports and logbooks to complete, and the all-important debrief to decide whether the mission has been a success.
I'm not sure what I got the impression, but I got the impression you were going right, and I started a right turn with you. As you were coming in, I was like, shh, that's going to make us too narrow. So I basically did this too long at you, and then had to come back around, which is why
It's no drama. As long as we're in the RAF, it's still to achieve what we want to achieve with the azimuth split and go from there.
The engineers also have a busy time post-flighting the aircraft, carrying out servicing, ultimately trying to make sure as many aircraft as possible are always available for use.
All here, full trades here. Right then, flying tonight, we've got Pops Tango going at 1630, which we've just got from 16 Squadron. Nil Weapons going at 1830 down at 2000. We're keeping that jet for tomorrow, I believe. We're flying it 3 times tomorrow.
We're going to fly it tonight and we'll AF it, and it looks like we're going to give it back to them tomorrow morning.
Okay.
All right? Let's work on that for now, and we'll discuss it again tomorrow morning with Nick.
From an engineer's point of view, it is a nice aircraft to work on. It's reasonably well accessible to all areas to get at the various components we need to service. And indeed, it's rare to have them out of service on the squadron for any great length of time. Once it comes back, it's on either a turnaround or an EF servicing. The turnaround, basically, you're just replenishing fluids and gaseous systems to make it available for the next flight. EF, that's an after-flight servicing, which is a little bit more involved because you're making sure there's nothing left on the aircraft that's going to leak, cause problems, that sort of affair, and then you're checking it more in depth for problems.
Although the Jaguar is over 30 years old, the squadron is far from being left behind. In addition to probably the most advanced avionics suite in any frontline fighter, 6 are the most experienced with NVGs, night vision goggles.
It's just a unique environment. It's completely different to what we're used to doing during the day. Obviously it's dark outside, and having the goggles on, it's a green world that you're producing. So you're flying around with effectively night vision goggles clipped to the helmet. It does get very tiring to fly with, and they provide effectively a green toilet roll tube type image for you to look through. So it gives you more of a 2D type image, and you have to work hard to convince your brain that you've got a 3D picture. So it can be quite challenging. It's a different environment altogether.
NVGs are a very difficult piece of equipment to use well, and simulator training is vital in preparation for that first flight.
Obviously you've got your flood lighting all turned up, and you've got night. That will give everything a red glow, and day. And NVG, which turns everything green.
So do you turn those on as soon as you get in the jet?
Yeah, I do. I turn it all on.
Okay, very good.
When the guy hands you your gogs, do your ESA 95 check, okay? Speak to you in a moment.
You happy with that, Derbs?
Yep.
Okay, so just take a moment or two and get all your lighting sorted out, and then go through your normal takeoff stuff. And effectively, the Bruno departure will just be a daytime technique, but obviously it's just a green day out there.
08, takeoff 22010.
Takeoff, call 08.
Rotate at 155.
Okay. Top 08 to approach.
08 stud 3. Total only burners at 300.
The workup that you go through to become NVG combat ready is quite extensive, so it's a very gradual workup because it is inherently quite a complicated type of task.
Afternoon, gents. Right, looking at the chart for 6 o'clock this morning, you can see it's a bit like the old proverbial dog's breakfast again. I think the mist and haze will thicken up and the cloud lower again.
NVG flying relies on ambient light from the moon and street lights. They don't function well in complete darkness.
For the NVG, very much the same. Generally speaking, poor in Area B as a result of the low cloud. I think it's a case of low strata Q, high strata sort of situation for much of tomorrow, so we're looking at greens and whites.
Let's try and pick a target around about here, Nick. Obviously, things to think about when we're looking for this immediately are the moon is a big factor, so it's going to be, what's the bearing tonight, 140? I think it's 140 at about 35 degrees elevation, so over here somewhere. So ideally you'd want to be attacking with it behind you, or at least not with it in your face.
Yeah, okay. Want to use that lighthouse in the middle?
Bound to be a good feature, isn't it?
Well, you've got the estuary, middle of the estuary, you're looking for the vertical extent in the
Yeah,
estuary.
let's do that.
Okay.
Okay. 5, 3, 2, 1. Heck, that's 1551. Right, aim of today's sortie is effectively to get airborne safely on goggles. So we'll go out, we'll look at the lighting, we'll get comfortable with the goggles, get into low level if we can, weather permitting. Have a look at low level, a target run, do some range work, low level and medium level, and then we'll do some sort of low level abort, a loaf, and back in for whatever we can get out of it, weather dependent.
Flight Lieutenant Nick Hendley is flying on his first mission with NVGs, and he will be in a two-seat Jaguar with Flight Lieutenant Graham Pemberton, who will then fly a second sortie with a pilot from 54 Squadron on an NVG workup.
Right, MVG specifics then. Your current Pembers is for your currency, Nick. Both night conventional current?
Yes.
Flying by day?
Yep. Yep.
You've got torches galore. You briefed yourselves on the moon, lux, weather and lighting.
Yep.
Okay. It's something that we started doing probably about 4 to 5 years ago, and it's a technique and a capability that we're developing over the years. So it's quite a large part of our flying these days, because obviously in terms of a operational theatre it may be something we're called upon to do. So we're doing more and more night flying when the weather allows, really.
Flying with night vision goggles is very challenging. It's something I've only done about 5 or 6 trips with the goggles, but and I'm doing the combat ready workup at the moment. But it's certainly a whole new dimension. It's quite scary. You've got no peripheral vision. You're flying, just looking down these 2 little tubes, and you're actually looking through almost solid metal. It's a totally electronically generated image, so it's quite demanding.
Sixth Squadron has historically spent most of its time overseas, and that nomadic lifestyle has meant they are always ready to move.
We're very easily deployable. Even in the Cold War days, we were a deployable force. So as we've moved in the last 5 or 10 years to expeditionary ops, where we get up and move from our home base, that was probably a more difficult transition for aircraft like the Tornado, because they were used to working from main operating bases. It was a very easy transition for us because we've always, at the drop of a hat, been able to up sticks and move, and all my personnel are used to deployed operations. So So that's probably one of our particular strengths.
The overseas detachments are seen as invaluable operational training and fine-tuning of weapons skills.
Sardinia was a weapons practice camp for the squadron, so we'd deploy en masse from Coldershall, and we'd use it to hone our weaponeering skills. All the types of weaponeering that we'd practiced back in the UK, but we'd consolidate it into a 2-week period. Good weather, very good range, good squadron spirit as well. That's all pulling together to try and get the most out of the 2 weeks. We'd concentrate on the 3 kilogram, which simulates the 1,000-pound retard, so predominantly for low-level work. Also the 14 kilogram, slightly bigger bomb, practice bombs, both the 3 kilogram and the 14 kilogram. And they're used so the range controller can spot where our bomb lands. They have the same ballistic properties, so they fall along the same flight path as a real weapon, be it a retard or a slick 1,000-pounder. Little smoke and flash charge in the nose allows the range controller to spot where our bomb landed and give us a score for that. We also use strafe as well. It's 30mm bullets for strafing guns attacks. The Oman was an incredible place to fly. The change in scenery across the whole of the country was just fabulous, was incredible. At one moment you'd have rolling Lawrence of Arabia style sand dunes to a few miles further on you'd have steep craggy valleys, one particular one known as Star Wars Valley. An incredible valley to fly in, very demanding, very, very good at homing our handling skills. The Oman really has some of the most incredible flying terrain and scenery in all of my time in the Air Force and subsequently.
Recently we had a detachment to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. The aim was primarily to drop munitions like Paveway 2, Paveway 3 and also to fire our CRV-7 rockets. But the secondary aim, which added an enormous amount to the detachment, was to incorporate all of those weapons firings into a close air support framework. So we invited some forward air controllers out from 16th Airborne Assault Brigade from Colchester, who effectively provided us with forward air controllers in the range areas where we went to drop these weapons. And that proved to be enormously successful, especially because we were able to use the new modern avionics suite that the Jaguar now has to its full. One of the reasons that the detachment was such a success was because everybody on the detachment came back with a career first, if not more than one. I myself had at least 2. I self-designated a Paveway 2, so not only did I actually drop the bomb, I also designated the bomb onto its target. And I also designated a Paveway 3, which was dropped by another aircraft, at the same time that another one of the squadron pilots designated another Paveway 3 drop from a 4th aeroplane. We are the only squadron, certainly in peacetime, to have done simultaneous attacks using Paveway 3 onto similar targets in the same geographical region. And we achieved 2 DHs split by 1 second between impacts.
Splash! Duffy, good splash. Razor off.
6th Squadron has many achievements to be proud of in its 90 years. Very few squadrons can lay claim to such a rich and varied history. But now is yet another era of impending change.
As with most of the Royal Air Force, we're looking forward to the advent of the Typhoon era, and 6th Squadron will be a Typhoon squadron. I have been told that officially. My job will be to maintain our continuous service. Up to now, our 90 years or our 90th anniversary is coming up. We've never had a period where we've been stood down or disbanded at any time. And it's extremely important for me to try and maintain that. So I will be looking to see if 6th Squadron can be one of the first Typhoon number plates. So lobbying our lords and masters who make the decisions about which number plates carry on.
They're no other squadrons in any air force in the world that are older than us. So maybe it's the Guinness Book of Records. We'll have to wait and see.
Power to